937-8100, which is on the screen. Please don't call in advance of the agenda item. With this being said, may I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Brotman,
Here.
Devine,
Here.
Kasakian,
Here.
Najarian,
Here.
Mayor Agajanian.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Ajemian. Next item, please.
The agenda for the Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on February 24th, 2021 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. What's next, please?
Would be item 1, community development regarding study session, status of mobility projects and programs, pedestrian plan, bicycle plan, citywide traffic study, Verdugo Wash, shared mobility, slow streets, and Vision Zero.
Thank you. Mr. Golanian?
Yes. Good afternoon, Mayor Agajanian, members of City Council. It is my pleasure to announce the study session. As you may know, there are a number of mobility-related projects and programs in the works at various stages of completion, and that's great news. So I thought we'll schedule a study session to bring you, council, and the public up to date on the status of these projects and programs, as well as the next steps moving forward. We have Bradley Calvert, our Assistant Director of Community Development, and Edward Heedy, Deputy Director of Public Works and City Engineer, who will share their presentations and they take turns to share their presentation. We're also honored to have Ms. Rachel Carpenter, the first ever Chief of Safety for Caltrans, who also has a presentation on Vision Zero. So we'll take that one first. Also wanted to mention that Council Member Najarian has a conflict on the Verdugo Wash item, so staff will put him in the lobby, Mr. Najarian, when that item comes up for presentation. And also, as you know, study sessions are typically informational only. We will entertain questions, but staff cannot take direction on any of these items. However, we'll bring them back independently and separately. For example, tonight we have one item on Slow Streets program that we will take direction from council, and in the coming weeks and months, we'll bring forward the other items for further discussion and direction. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Calvert to introduce our first presenter. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Calvert.
Great, thank you and good afternoon. Good afternoon. As mentioned, we want to go through a number of different initiatives, but what we'd like to do is ask first Ms. Rachel Carpenter to provide us some information and background on the Vision Zero topic, which is something that is a component and an element of the citywide pedestrian plan. So I'd like to turn that over to her to present.
Thank you. Ms. Carpenter, I guess? Did I say it right?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pull up my slide deck, so bear with me just 1 minute. Let's see.
Wow.
Lisette, can you please confirm you can see my slide?
Ms.
We
Carpenter, we can see it.
Yeah, Ms. Carpenter is a PE. Thank you. Welcome.
She is. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. My name is Rachel Carpenter, and I am the Caltrans Chief Safety Officer. I oversee, exciting to share that I oversee our new Division of Safety programs and lead all of our department's safety work. And I'm here today to share a bit of progress we've made at Caltrans on some of our new safety and speed management initiatives. And I have to add that although I haven't been in years, I spent many enjoyable summers visiting my grandmother who lived in Glendale. So your city is very close to my heart. I want to highlight a number of our recent activities related both to speed limits and to engineering solutions. And then lastly, I'm going to ask for your help. Let's see, there's a bit of, I'm getting a bit of feedback. I don't know if everybody is muted or not. If you're not muted, please do so. Thank you. So I'll end today by asking for your help. There's a wealth of knowledge in the state and in this meeting related to these topics, and Caltrans is interested in tapping into that knowledge as we work to improve traffic safety across the state. I am going to provide a quick recap of CalSTA's Zero Traffic Fatality Task Force report of findings, which is the original source of many of Caltrans' current safety and speed management efforts. In 2019, the state legislature passed Assembly Bill 2363, which directed the California State Transportation Agency, or CalSTA, to convene a task force to investigate speed limit setting methodology and deliver a final report of findings to the legislature. So the report was published in January of 2020 after a nearly 9-month-long process of research and discussions with traffic safety practitioners, advocacy groups, and local and state officials across the state. We were very fortunate to have your chief, Povalatis, let's see, I know I'm going to not get this correct, Povalatis, amongst our expert task force. His expertise from the law enforcement perspective was tremendously helpful to the development of our report. So we very much thank you for that. The report itself contained 16 findings and 26 recommendations across 4 categories. So those categories were establishing speed limits, engineering, solutions, enforcement, solutions, and education. Since the publication of this report, several departments under CalSTA's jurisdiction, including Caltrans, the California Highway Patrol, and the Office of Traffic Safety, have begun taking action to further define and implement many of the report's recommendations. In the next slides, I'm going to highlight some of the actions that Caltrans is currently working on. One of the initiatives that I'm most excited about is developing a new approach to setting speed limits based on safe system principles. So the safe system approach is used worldwide, but it hasn't been widely adopted in the US. And it is very similar to the Vision Zero policies that we're seeing in the US. It contrasts with California's current speed limit setting method, though. Currently, California's legislated method of setting speed limits is based on something called the 85th percentile, which is an outdated approach that CalSTA found is no longer meeting the needs of California's multimodal, complex transportation environment. Caltrans has taken the first steps in implementing this recommendation by initiating a research project that's led by the University of California at Berkeley. The project is called Developing a Safe System Approach to Setting Speed Limits, and it's the direct result of the recommendation I just covered in CalSTA's report. I'm happy to report that the project formally kicked off last month and represents the culmination of many conversations and administrative work that started last summer. So the project's anticipated completion is February of 2020. And this is, again, a new way to set speed limits that doesn't rely on driver behavior. I want to go over a few key highlights. So in addition to UC Berkeley's Safe Transportation Research and Education Center team, the project team also includes the Vision Zero Network, which is a national organization that works with state and local governments across the country on reducing traffic-related deaths and fatalities to zero. The scope of the work includes many important activities, a literature review, stakeholder interviews, an expert advisory group, case studies, a technical report, and a policy brief. Lastly, we structured the deliverables and milestones with this project with the goal of having something implementable in mind. So, for instance, the report and brief will identify current barriers to the safe system approach in California and will recommend solutions to overcome them. With this project, we really wanted an action plan that we can implement. So I'm excited that the project is now off the ground and moving. Developing a new approach to setting speed limits based on safe system principles will take time, and it's a long-term project though. So in the meantime, we can explore options to increase flexibility within the current framework for setting speed limits that is based on the 85th percentile. So one key takeaway from CalSTA's report is that our current procedures for establishing speed limits don't offer agencies enough flexibility to set appropriate speed limits for their roadways. So the report offered a number of specific recommendations to remedy this, including revising engineering and traffic survey procedures, revising and adding new prima facie speed limit categories, as well as others. So as a whole, if implemented, this set of recommendations would provide agencies with greater flexibility to set appropriate speed limits by adjusting the current speed limit setting procedure. We're planning to develop a draft concept proposal on how to provide agencies with this greater flexibility. So we're also very closely monitoring legislative bills and are prepared to provide technical assistance to legislative members if needed or asked. While the specific recommendations in the report included suggesting tweaks and adjustments to the current procedures for setting speed limits, we're open to additional suggestions or requests on how to improve flexibility on setting speed limits for cities and agencies. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to discuss how you can help and get involved. Well, I have been discussing some of the changes that we can make to how we establish speed limits. One takeaway from the task force meetings last year was that Caltrans has an opportunity to enhance its technical assistance resources and training to help cities and agencies better leverage existing speed limit setting laws. So the current methodology is complicated and confusing, and we found that state and local agencies would benefit from a single source of guidance on how to establish speed limits. We learned that many of our larger local agencies are familiar with policies and procedures, statutory mandates, but others are not aware of the numerous existing rules that allow them to deviate from the 85th percentile speed, or they interpret the rules differently. So while we continue to work on longer term changes to the way the way that we set speed limits, we are also can provide step-by-step guidance that can help agencies and localities better understand how the current process for setting speed limits works today. So we've developed an initial strategy and are currently developing detailed work plans for these interrelated initiatives. So establish technical assistance resources, including a web page, developing training, and revising the California Manual for Setting Speed Limits to comprehensively cover speed limit setting methodology. At a high level, our next steps are to gather information on what resources are needed, analyze improvements, and then develop content. So I'm excited to share that we're collaborating with the California Department of Public Health on these interrelated recommendations. CDPH has secured funding for technical assistance resources, and we're in discussions with them on how we can jointly collaborate to implement these recommendations from a traffic safety and public health perspective. In addition to pursuing improvements in the area of speed limits, we're also making improvements related to roadway engineering and design. So specifically, we launched an initiative to improve the ways in which traffic control devices are used and deployed across the state. So in California, the Manual and Uniform Traffic Control Devices governs the use of traffic control devices across the state. If a need emerges for a new traffic control device, like a new sign or marking, Local agencies must either apply to use a new device through an experimentation process, or they must go through an interim approval process. So last fall, we conducted a survey of over 4,500 local agencies and cities across the state in order to better understand how we can improve this experimentation process and approval process in order to meet their needs. We received a lot of really good feedback, and we've analyzed the results. Some of the respondents indicated that we need to add standards around signs and striping for alternative transportation modes like scooters and electric bikes. Other respondents indicated that the process to add new standards is too drawn out and causes jurisdictions to use new traffic control devices without formal permission, which then increases their tort liability. Survey respondents also expressed a need for the ability to make short-term traffic safety improvements in response to a immediate traffic safety need, as well as the need for quick build guidance and ped and bike improvements for urban interchanges. So Caltrans is currently submitting comments to the Federal Highway Administration, FHWA, regarding proposed changes to the national MUTCD, which is what the California MUTCD is built on and has to align with. So these comments usually come from Caltrans divisions and districts, but we're also going to be incorporating relevant survey results in our submission to Federal Highway. Once the national MUTCD is published, any new traffic control device will be adopted in the California MUTCD. So if needed, we will include them in the California MUTCD after going through the California Traffic Control Devices Committee process to consult local agencies and the public. Our traffic control device survey includes responses related to improving pedestrian and bicyclist safety. And this is an area in which Caltrans has made actually some pretty significant progress. So one of the recommendations from CalSTA's Zero Traffic Fatality Task Force report was to make the pilot state-led traffic monitoring programs that identify and address locations with pedestrian and bicyclist related crashes permanent. Last year, Caltrans had 4 ongoing traffic safety monitoring programs that identified and addressed locations statewide that have experienced vehicle-related crash types. But previously, none of these programs provided a regular mechanism to evaluate and improve locations for pedestrian or bicyclist safety. So I'm happy to report that in the last 6 months, we've made these monitoring programs permanent. So for both the pedestrian and bicyclist monitoring program, and what we call monitoring is really just safety improvement. So for these ped and bike monitoring programs, we've implemented permanent hotspot and systemic programs. So this involved securing funding to convert these from pilot to permanent programs. We also developed and released the next round of pedestrian monitoring programs updates, which included developing lists of crash locations and distributing these lists to our district staff to do an investigation. So our next step will be to further develop the 2 programs, including the systemic bicyclist monitoring program, as well as continually update both programs. And I do just want to add that for those unfamiliar with the details of traffic safety, hotspot programs look at locations where there are high collision concentrations of a certain group, like pedestrians or bikes. Systemic programs are more proactive in that they look at locations, they look at where crashes have occurred across our system, then try to find similar roadway locations to implement countermeasures in advance of a crash occurring. So we have both, the takeaway is that we've made programs for pedestrian and bicyclist safety, both reactive and proactive programs, so that we're trying to really, take a multi-pronged approach to improving safety for these most vulnerable users. As you can see, Caltrans is working hard to make California's roadways safer for all road users, and we're open to new ideas and feedback on how we can best accomplish this. If you want to get involved, please send your suggestions and ideas for improvement to our new safety program division email inbox, which is shown here on the screen. You can feel free to send any suggestions, but our immediate need is for suggestions on how to enhance technical assistance resources like manuals and websites, documentation and training related to existing speed limit setting methodology. While we're committed to developing a new safe system approach to setting speed limits that isn't based on driver behavior, and exploring how we can give cities more authority to lower their speed limits. These are longer term processes to provide, that are going to require statutory changes. So in the meantime, there's an immediate opportunity to provide clarification on the current speed limit setting methodology and educate stakeholders of how they can lower speed limits within the parameters of current law. So with that, thank you so much for the time this afternoon to share a little bit about Caltrans safety and speed management work. I do just want to add that as a state, we've set a goal of 0 fatal and serious injuries across our roadways by 2050. And we are really taking steps to make sure that we reduce those fatal and serious injuries each year so that we can reach our goal of 0 by 2050. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions if we have the time.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Carpenter, PE. Is there any question from Ms. Carpenter?
I have one, Mr.
Yes,
Mayor.
Mr. Najarian, Councilmember Najarian.
So, thank you, Ms. Carpenter, or Dr. or Engineer Carpenter. How important is it to have the uniform traffic control devices statewide?
So that's a loaded question. I will do my best to answer. What we want is we want to ensure that there's consistency statewide so that when you're on vacation, when you're traveling for work, that there is the ability for traffic control devices to be understood easily so that you can respond to them. And so I think it is critical that there is that thread throughout signing, striping, markings throughout the state. That goes even further to make sure that travel between states is consistent so that when you're in Glendale, the signs and the markings don't look and mean completely different things than when you're in, Sacramento or in, Austin. So I think it is important for driver understanding for there to be that consistency. That said, we do have existing processes to experiment. And we really encourage local agencies to use that process because then we can make sure to collect the data and update our manual. So then any great news sign or striping signal can be used by everyone. Does that answer your question?
It does. So eventually, is your agency let's say there's we'll probably be talking about this later, but we have some slow street signage. And our signage is different from West Hollywood's, is different from Pasadena's, is different than other states. Do we get back to you and say, gee, this sandwich board with the flasher really works, or they're getting knocked over? And then do you, as the agency, make statewide recommendations as to what our best practices should be? Is that sort of how it goes?
Absolutely. You're learning quickly. So Slow Streets is sort of a movement that's a wonderful movement that's been taking over. I have one just a few blocks away, but we don't currently have state or federal guidance on that signage. So you make a great point in that when you visit a slow street in your city, the signage is not consistent as other cities. So the process that is available for cities to use is to come to the state and say, Caltrans, we want formal permission to experiment with this sign. The intent being that we want you, Caltrans, to incorporate, take all of these experiments that are happening, in your city, any city, come up with the recommendation on the best sign, and then incorporate that into our manual. So at this point, cities are kind of on their own without a lot of state guidance because this is a new, so streets are sort of new with the pandemic. But yes, the intent is for you to follow this, somewhat rigorous process where you're collecting lots of data so that we can make sure that whatever sign we eventually approve for use statewide is easy to understand, conveys a simple, concise message, things like this.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr.
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Botman.
Hi, Ms. Carpenter. Thanks for your presentation. I saw you present earlier at a SCAG meeting, so I had asked staff to bring you here because I thought it was fantastic. So I do want to follow up a little bit on this on MUTCD because it's not just about consistency of signage, but it's also about and I'm new to this, so I may not explain this right, but I understand in some cases MUTCD will require that we put in certain types of treatments, such as a traffic light, or it may disallow us from putting in a stop sign where we would want to put it in. And it seems like there are a set of priorities that are kind of embedded in MUTCD, and I'll give that I think run contrary to what we might want to achieve here. And I'll give an example. Right now we have a project to put traffic signals on some in dense residential areas that are pretty walkable in our downtown or our downtown adjacent. And those signals will certainly improve traffic flow, but that will come at the expense of pedestrian safety and bicycle safety and convenience, because right now cars all have to stop at the four-way stop sign, which is what we have now. So every car is stopping, as long as they're following the rules and not doing a California stop, they're stopping at that stop sign. Whereas with a light, there's going to be, cars, typically when the light is green, you try to get it before it turns yellow, or if it's yellow, you try to get it quickly before it turns red. So we're going to have more speeding through that location and more inconvenience to pedestrians waiting for their turn. They have to push the button and all the rest of it. Yet we've done, warrant studies, and the MUTCD guidelines are telling us this is what we need to do, or we are at, tort risk, like you mentioned before. How do we deal with this? Because this is contrary to a pedestrian plan, which we're going to be discussing a little bit today and then approving next week. And I think the two are in direct conflict.
So thanks for the question, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to present to you today again. I think you make a lot of good points, and I want to just reiterate that the MUTCD, that the manual contains, it governs the design and the use of traffic control devices for, all public roads. And what it does is it sets out, like you referred to, warrants, it sets out sort of guidance on when and how to use these various traffic control devices. So there is no place, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, and there is no place in the MUTCD that says, Glendale, you must install a signal at this intersection. It's up to your engineers to use the guidance and the standards that we provide in the MUTCD to make the best choice about what traffic control device should be used at any location. The first part of the MUTCD is very clear that engineering judgment should always be used. So there is nothing in the MUTCD that should trump any sort of engineering decision about the best traffic control device or treatment at a certain location. So I don't know that there's conflicts in inherent conflicts in the MUTCD. I think it really just comes down to making sure that traffic control devices are used appropriately so that so that the sort of mobility and safety of all users is maintained while traveling. I don't know that that helps much. I'd be happy to elaborate.
Yeah, I guess the question really is about how much scope do we have to make these decisions, because the impression I get is if the warrant study says we need a traffic signal, then we need a traffic signal. And even if we don't think that that's in the best interest of our community as far as safety goes, or VMT, or encouraging cut through traffic, because I think that's another thing it will do. It will encourage cut through traffic into residential neighborhoods. That, if we don't follow the strict rules, then we're subject to a potential lawsuit if somebody gets into an accident at that location. So it sounds like what you're saying is we have some scope to make those trade-offs, and that's different from what I understood.
No, you do. So I just happen to have the MUTCD handy, and in part one, in the first section, there's a standard statement, sort of the highest type of statement that states this manual describes the application of traffic control devices, but shall not be a legal requirement for their installation. It goes on to talk about engineering study and engineering judgment that should be used when when implementing any sort of traffic control device. So it is extremely important that the manual is not used as as blindly followed. And we're pretty explicit in the beginning, very beginning part of the manual, that the intent is that engineers do use their judgment before implementing any sort of traffic control device.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I have another follow-up.
Council Member Najarian.
Is engineering judgment the same thing as political judgment? No, I'm serious. I mean, we have residents that aren't professionals that say, this is what I think. We may have engineers that say, this is what we think. But the manual says engineering judgment, correct?
That's correct. It's very difficult as an engineer when there's political pressure to implement a signal or a sign, or to not to implement one. It is very clear that it is engineering judgment. So that PE after my name means that I'm an engineer and I have that judgment. In fact, the manual even goes on to explain what engineering study and engineering judgment means. So I would just caution that we don't make engineering choices based on political will.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Again, Ms. Carpenter, PE. Now we go back to Mr. Colbert, I guess. Mr. Colbert?
Yes, great. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Carpenter, for providing that overview. What I'd like to do is, as Mr. Galani mentioned, is go through a series of projects that you'll be seeing over the next couple of weeks and months. So this is really to serve as an update on the status of those projects, some of the next steps on those projects. And what I'd like to begin with here is kind of picking up that discussion with our pedestrian plan, and then with Vision Zero. Let me get this launched here real quick. And really the idea behind Vision Zero, as mentioned, we heard statements about design and speed and how that impacts safety. This is a holistic and all-encompassing philosophy and approach to improving roadway safety, and it includes all modes of transportation. This is something that we do have as part of the pedestrian plan, that this sort of philosophy and approach and participating in the Slow Streets Network should become a priority for the city and should move forward. As I mentioned, this is the idea here is that we establish a time frame. We heard the comment at 2050 for the state of California to eliminate fatal and serious collisions. And it's important to know that it's a very comprehensive approach. This encompasses all modes, pedestrians, cyclists, motorists. But for us internally, it also encompasses many departments, from the enforcement, from police, to the implementation, from public works and engineering, to the planning that CDD does, as well as education, which spans all of our divisions, all of our departments. This is really about safe street design and speed reduction, knowing that speed is what kills, as we heard from Ms. Carpenter's presentation, but also employing the idea of complete streets, making sure that all modes of transportation can use our streets safely and effectively. That also includes infrastructure, which is what our pedestrian plan and our bicycle transportation plan heavily enforce. As I had mentioned, education enforcement are also keys to this. Encouraging good behavior, teaching good behavior. We've seen that with our own education safety campaign for pedestrians prior to the citywide pedestrian plan. And this is a strategy that is recommended as part of the pedestrian plan. It is something that we would need to come back to council with in terms of obtaining a formal resolution and direction to move forward with, but it is a philosophy that is embedded as part of our pedestrian plan. And speaking of that pedestrian plan, if you recall last summer, we gave a pretty in-depth presentation to go over some of the key strategies, key philosophies for the pedestrian plan and the bicycle transportation plan. We gave this similar presentation to Transportation and Parking Commission just the other week. We're going to give a little bit of an abridged, truncated version since we did walk through many of those strategies last time. So we'll do a little bit of an overview and then provide next steps. But the pedestrian plan is broken into two parts. Part one is taking stock, and this is really assessing our existing conditions and the collision data that is there. Understanding where these hot spots are, where we're most likely to see injuries and collisions. Part two is really about recommendations for infrastructure and non-infrastructure improvements. And some of those we'll briefly touch on, but again, last summer we went in depth to discuss different concepts for curb bulb outs, mid-block crossings, a number of those strategies. And the goals of all of these things are to improve the safety and the experiential quality of the pedestrian environment. And I want to emphasize that part about experiential quality, because while we can do all the safety improvements that we need to make it a safer environment, the experience is what's going to encourage people to walk more as well. Not just how safe it is, but is it an enjoyable experience? Proper lighting, proper vegetation, proper buffers. Is it a walk that someone wants to take? And overall, that it provides these goals and these benchmarks for us to achieve and strive for. This is just a kind of a snapshot of where our high collision corridors exist. You can see these are in our densest places. These are where the most pedestrians do cross, do walk. You can see a number of them in downtown adjacent neighborhoods, predominantly in South Glendale, with the exception of a few on Pacific, up on San Fernando, as well as West Glen Oaks. The diagram here, the red dots indicate the highest density of pedestrian collisions. So you see a number of those locations right around or in downtown Glendale. Some of the improvements that have already been moved forward with prior to the pedestrian plan.
Bradley, could I interrupt really quickly?
Yes.
I have a question with regard to that chart and the mapping of where the collisions occur. Have we also done an assessment as to the time of day when most collisions occur? Is there a pattern in terms of how much vehicular traffic there is on the roads?
We do have time of day. I do not have that readily available, but I can make sure that when we come back on March 23rd for the pedestrian plan adoption, I'll make sure that we present that information.
Thanks. I think that's important to note because obviously patterns matter in trying to address these issues. Just the frequency of the collisions is not enough. If there is a correlation as to the time of day, then there can be, I'm sure engineers can come up with ways to address that as well. Thank you.
We'll make sure to bring that back as part of that information. So one of the first things that we've done was the safety education campaign. This is the Be Street Smart campaign that we are all familiar with, medallions on the sidewalks, the streetlight banners that were hung. And this really was intended in the spirit of Vision Zero to be education to all modes. There were banners that reminded drivers of the potential conflicts and collisions to be aware of pedestrians that were crossing the street. The medallions reinforce good pedestrian behavior. So this really was in that spirit of Vision Zero and part of that education component of it. There was also the Safe Routes to School, pedestrian and cyclist rodeos were a portion of that, walking school buses. That's something the city of Glendale has participated in each year on the bike and walk to school days. Again, trying to reinforce good behavior to encourage walking. We are very fortunate that we do have a number of schools that are in higher density communities and do present that opportunity. Not many communities can actually have that luxury. So we do have a good mix of land uses and locations, and just making sure that the infrastructure and the education is there to continue to encourage that. Some of the recommended improvements as part of the pedestrian plan, signaling is definitely one of them. Improving pedestrian signals. There are things like default walk phases, delayed timing. Those are all intended to help the convenience or to give the pedestrian a head start, especially where there are left turns on green, right turns on green that are allowed, or on red for right turns. So giving that pedestrian a head start, making sure that the signal is coordinated with the parallel street so that they're not waiting to necessarily push a button. We've seen a big push towards that, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, to eliminate the use of the buttons to enable the crosswalks. High visibility crosswalks are also a key component. This can be done through typical zebra striping. It can also be done through other creative measures. But the idea here is to create a visual contrast so that they are more visible for motorists, and pedestrians are also aware of where to cross. Pedestrian refuge areas, these are particularly important on wider streets where maybe we don't have the signal timing to encourage crossing the entire street, or even more importantly, to address those that may be more mobility challenged. What we find in the data in the pedestrian plan is some of the most frequent victims of pedestrian collisions are our senior citizens. And having these pedestrian refuge areas in the middle of our wide streets can give them an opportunity, if they cannot make the street through the entire walk phase, to be taken out of harm's way and to reduce that exposure. Curb extensions such as bulb outs, those are really designed to try to slow motorists as they make turns. You know, the tighter that corner is, the more that it bulbs out, the more a motorist has to slow down when compared to a wider turning radii. There are also turn pocket removals. The diagrams there off to the right represent our two most frequent instances for pedestrian collisions. That is a left turning vehicle on green, and also a right turning vehicle. That's the second most frequent. So in some cases, it may be appropriate to remove turn pockets so that we can avoid those kind of collisions. Lane reconfigurations are also part of that. That is one of the larger.
Excuse me, Mr. Calvert.
Yes.
When you remove the turn pocket, then what will happen? I mean, they go straight and then they have to go and turn around? How it's going to work? Let's say you're corner of Brand and San Fernando Road, very busy intersection. Then you move the turn pocket, what they going to do?
They would still be able to turn with the through lane. Rather than having their own dedicated lane just for turning, which is where we see more of these instances occur, it would be through the through lane. That assists in slowing down traffic. It also assists in terms of pedestrians crossing the street and avoiding those kind of conflicts. So cars can still make the turn. They just wouldn't have a dedicated lane for turning. What I would add to this too, and this is kind of the last bullet point to this slide, is that any physical improvements, whether that is taking out a turn lane, creating a curb bulb out, a lane reconfiguration so that we can make room for more sidewalk or more bicycle lanes, all of these would have to go through additional traffic analysis to justify whether or not it is compatible with our existing transportation fabric. So just because we adopt the pedestrian plan, which would be here in a couple weeks, just because those improvements are recommended doesn't mean that that's exactly how those improvements would move forward. They would still be pending an additional analysis and a traffic study as well.
No, but I understand what you're saying, but I cannot imagine to remove turn pocket removal. Some places I understand that in the middle of busy Brand and around shopping areas, one of the streets you remove it is okay. They're going to go to the next street and turn around and they come back. Some of them, as I said, I brought an example of San Fernando and Brand. It's very hard. I cannot imagine to remove a turn pocket, whether it's from San Fernando Road to get into Brand or from Brand turning left to San Fernando Road? I cannot imagine. Okay, Mr. Golanian wants to answer. Okay, Mr.
Mayor
Golan.
Agajanian, just want to clarify, the recommendation that Mr. Calvert is referring to is not going to restrict turn movements. A vehicle in a traffic lane will have the option of either going straight or making that turn, a right turn lane. So we're not blocking it, we're not restricting it. It's just that they won't have a dedicated turn lane to make that movement.
Then how that's going to make it better? You don't, whether you put it or you don't put it, at the end, the fact is that person will turn right and somebody will walk, and maybe I don't understand how that will change something on this.
Mr. Calvert?
My apologies, I didn't include that in this slide, as that was something we had discussed a little bit more last summer. I will make sure that's in the discussion on the 23rd. But again, what it does is essentially slows down that traffic, makes it more aware that pedestrians are also in that environment. What I would also add is this isn't a recommendation to remove all turn pockets in the city, just in potential high collision corridors to consider studying that and to see whether or not it would make the intended improvements. So again, these aren't going to be citywide. It does not prohibit a car from making a turn. And it's also something that would be studied at in greater depth as well if we were to move forward with such recommendation, depending on the intersection.
All right. I just wanted to say what you said makes sense, but there are certain turn pockets, and the same as Brand and Glen Oaks. I cannot imagine what will happen if we remove those. So hopefully you'll consider that, and I am satisfied with your answer. Thank you.
So one of the things, and we had brought some information back in the summer, July, regarding incident rate. What makes this pedestrian plan so important as we move towards adoption is that we have seen incidents go up. We only had a projection when we looked last summer at this. We knew that it was going to be a little bit higher for 2019, but hopefully within the range of what we saw in 2017 and 2018. And it turned out that 2019 was not the case for us. This was our second highest incident rate since 2013, our third since 2003. So it shows that we definitely need to consider these improvements, in many cases implement a number of them as well. We saw a dramatic rise in 2019. What we have found is this also does correlate both the decline and the rise of the end of the safety education campaign, which I'm going to touch on that in just a moment. But 2019 for pedestrian collisions was not a good year for us, and definitely shows the need to move forward with the bicycle or with the citywide pedestrian plan in the same spirit as the bicycle transportation plan, because we have seen decline and stabilization of the incident rate for those, which I'll cover in just a moment. So the adoption process, again, we're going to come back March 23rd to seek formal adoption of the transportation plan. We had done a mitigated negative declaration for this in December of 2020. This was to make sure that we were covered from an environmental review perspective. Some of these were covered, or some of the review was actually conducted as part of other community plans. This was to make sure that we covered the other side of town as well. So just kind of covering our basis and also recognizing that we have seen some of our plans challenged. We wanted to take the safe bet and pursue the MMD for this. We only received general comments from Caltrans, much of what you actually heard today from Ms. Carpenter's presentation regarding speed limits, things of that nature. So not objecting to anything in the plan, but just some recommendations to go even further, really in line with some of the Vision Zero strategies. We did present this as part of the body of work to the TPC. We walked through that a little more in depth with them, similar to what we did with you last summer. And one of the recommendation is to look at a phase 2 education campaign, recognizing that there was some benefit from it, that we did see some improvement from or a decline really in pedestrian incidents because of that. So what I'm going to touch on now is the bicycle transportation plan. This was adopted by City Council.
Bradley?
Yes.
Bradley?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I wanted to ask a question before you moved off of the PED plan there. And I know you're bringing it back, so we'll get into it more. But the question that the mayor raised about the turn pockets got me thinking because, and also a comment you made about the fact that, you know, any of these treatments are going to come back and we're going to relook at them individually and we're going to look at how they impact vehicle flow, right? And we're going to go through that whole process, community outreach, transportation commission, back to council. So I understand all that, but there are going to be cases. I mean, we can see right here with getting rid of, let's say you recommend getting rid of a left turn. Well, what we're talking about, a left turn pocket, right? That's going to mean that some cars are going to be queuing up, and that's going to increase delay going through that intersection, maybe by a second, 2 seconds, or whatever it might be. But that will have some impact on vehicle speeds and just vehicle throughput. On the other hand, there's you know, we're getting what we've said we want, which is increased safety, and we're getting, you know, probably other benefits, maybe reduced vehicle miles traveled, which has a positive impact on climate goals and on air quality and things like that. How do we look at these trade-offs? And it kind of seems to me that the framing is going to be really important, because by passing the pedestrian plan, assuming we do, we're kind of making a statement, a policy statement, that we are going to weigh pedestrian safety and maybe our health goals higher than we did in the past, let's say, and put greater priority on them relative to vehicle throughput, for instance. But how do we make that explicit? And ultimately, I mean, it's kind of a harsh thing to say, but how do we value a life? How many seconds delay are we willing to give up to save a life, right? And these things, you know, are easy to try to avoid, but at some point we're going to have some kind of explicit guideline for saying, you know, no, we don't want to remove that turn pocket because we don't want to give up the 3 seconds delay, even though that may cost a life once in every 10 years, right? How do we go through that analysis? And what does it mean when we adopt the PED plan? Does it mean we're calibrating things differently? We're going to be doing our engineering analysis differently. So I'm just putting it out there. Maybe this is something we discuss later in the month, but it's something I'm thinking.
I can provide a general answer to that, and you're correct. That's something we can also dive deeper into on the 23rd. By adopting the plan, it's essentially given us a toolkit and a set of strategies to be able to improve the pedestrian realm. Now, that conversion to VMT is already starting to put more of an emphasis on multimodal transportation. Mitigation strategies are going to consider those modes of transportation first. We're now changing even the calculation so that we can recognize that people do use other modes of transportation. But we also do not lose necessarily that right to be able to evaluate a project from a level of service perspective, so that we can understand maybe what a consequence is at an intersection. Ultimately, those decisions, we do have that flexibility and that ability to choose. Council would be presented this information per project on a project by project level. And from there, council could make that decision on which direction we're moving based on that information, both VMT and, if applicable, a level of service analysis as well. And really that's going to come from the council direction, council guidance.
Okay, well, we'll be talking about that more, but thanks for that.
All right. I just, I don't know if this is the right time to speak about this issue, if this has to do with what we have in front of us. I remember a few years ago and years before, from the time I came in on this dais, I said, why we don't study, why we don't turn some of the streets, not wide street, the tinier streets, smaller streets, such as the ones which are, there are one lane in each side, to turn them, to make them one-way street, let's say from east to west, and the other smaller street from west to east, like when you go to New York. I remember they did it 50 years ago when I was young kid, I was reading about it, and I was surprised that, or maybe 60 years ago, I don't know how long time ago anyway, on New York, the tinier ones, they turned it all one-way streets, and the larger ones, such as Broadway, Brand, there are two-way streets. However, what I'm trying to say is that something that we can study along with what you are studying here. I'm sure whoever, those who have been in New York, they know it's impossible on those tiny streets to have two ways like ours. Wilson is very narrow street, and there are lots of them. When you have one-way street, then the traffic goes faster because that matter of turning left and stopping others, we eliminating those stops. So does that have, it's along with what we are studying today? To
That would
consider
be
it?
more befitting of our circulation element updates, as well as the citywide traffic study. What I would say about that is that, yes, it does assist in moving automobiles faster at times. What it also does is it creates a more hostile environment for multiple modes of transportation, including bicyclists and pedestrians. It increases the danger for them. There are other cities that have done it. New York, as you noted there, downtown Seattle is another example. But those are also environments that are already much, much denser than we are in terms of uses, in terms of existing pedestrians and cyclists. So there may be a benefit, and this would be a trade-off for discussion as part of that citywide traffic study and as part of the circulation element update. But there would be a trade-off in order to move automobiles faster while also decreasing the activity on these streets, as well as potentially posing greater risk and danger to other modes of transportation.
But is that something that we can study at least or try very few streets? I mean, one or two, and see what kind of result we get.
Yes,
We
Mr.
don't, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
we won't know until we try. I'm not recommending, let's go ahead and make all tiny streets one way, and just, we may try one or two streets and see how it comes along, and then we'll continue. Mr. Golani.
Yeah, definitely, Mayor Agajanian. We can include that in the upcoming traffic impact study that will be undertaken probably this summer, if not fall of this year.
All right,
So we
thank
can incorporate
And-
that.
Mayor,
thank-
And Mayor, if I
Yes,
may add,
Yes, Ms. Devine.
one-way streets has been my bailiwick for 6 years since I've been on this council. My first term, I suggested Louise one-way and maybe Doran one-way or Duran, and supposedly studies were done and they were not, it was not applicable. So this is something that I've been asking for years. So hopefully, maybe this summer we can get to that. But Mr. Calvert's making a really good argument against one-way streets, I have to say. But I still think it's worth looking into. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. Thank
Mr.
you.
Mayor.
Mr. Calvert.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, Mr. Najarian?
Yeah.
Okay.
So since I've been on council, we've looked at one-way couplets is what they're called, at least twice. And I know that we have at least 2 studies on those. So before we task Mr. Calvert to start from scratch, maybe we can dig up those findings. And, I'm not one way or the other on it, but I think the work has been done analyzing traffic flows and speeds and all that. So don't start over. Go look in the library somewhere. There's some good information that we have that we can quickly get to council.
Yes,
Thank you.
Council Member
Mr.
Najarian, you're
Gulani.
absolutely correct. However, those were done quite a few years ago. We will definitely dig them up and make it part of the presentation when we come back to council with the traffic impact study. Just as you noted, what's been done, and Council Member Devine noted, what's been done in the past, they were conceptual designs and studies, but that goes back quite a few years ago. So I think an updated study and analysis is warranted, if that's the council's desire.
I mean, I just want to say, regardless what the study shows, we have to try to know it. Maybe we have to do 1 or 2 streets and see how it comes along, and then we'll be more practical than thinking, changing everything in the city of Glendale. So we try with a small example of it, and then we will continue. I think that can be the best. Anyway, Mr. Calvert.
Great, thank you. And Public Works is going to be giving an update on the citywide traffic study in just a few slides here. So we'll have some more information regarding that. So for the bicycle transportation plan, this was adopted by City Council in September of 2012. There were recommended periodic updates with Council, which we have come back a couple times here since about 2018, if I'm not mistaken. There has been some consideration and discussion on to update. We would say that there's we need to identify funding for that ultimately, and then also time. The capacity to be able to work on that. What we are doing though, when we look at this, and this is something that we've talked about with CDD and Public Works, is to evaluate projects as they're moving forward for implementation for current best practices, recognizing that the bicycle transportation at this point is 8-9 years old, that maybe not every strategy in there is with current practices. Now, that doesn't mean that we would go and reevaluate every single possible project that we would move forward with. This would need to be contingent on funding and timing. We don't want to disrupt projects that are already in progress, whether they're shovel ready or already being built. We don't want to reevaluate projects that are in construction or have secured their funding. But if there's an opportunity and we see a project on the radar, and we know that maybe there could be another potential alternative, that this would be a good time for us to be able to take a look at that before securing that funding, before completing construction documents. So that's how we're taking that approach right now with the bicycle transportation plan. Knowing that we don't quite have the capacity or the funding to execute a full adoption right now, to consider projects on a project by project level where it's applicable. Again, it doesn't mean reconsidering every project that comes forward, but there may be opportunities where we can pursue best practices or make updates. But really the purpose of this plan is to create a network of routes. Rather than just discrete lanes, discrete facilities, that this allows our residents, our users to be able to go north, south, east, west, to move from employment centers to commercial centers to residential centers with a connected network of bicycle facilities. It's also looking to improve existing facilities, new routes that will link major activity centers, but also provide amenities. This isn't just about providing a bike lane or a share. We need to provide secure bicycle parking. We need to provide those kind of amenities so that it encourages riders and users of the network. So just kind of overview of what those facilities can look like. A class 1 route is a paved right-of-way, which is separated from traffic, similar to the Riverwalk. Class 2 is a restricted right-of-way. You can see in that lower image there. It's a dedicated space, typically separated by a painted line. That is a lane for bicyclists, very similar to what we may see on, say, Central. Class 3 routes are sharrows, and that's painting that symbol that you actually see in that lower image in the street to designate that this is a shared route and a shared path for both motorists and cyclists, intended to raise that awareness for motorists. There's also a class 4, and this was something that was adopted by the state in 2016. Design standards were released in 2018, but this is really about creating a protected, restricted right-of-way. That's not currently in our plan, because if you recall, that's our plan was in 2012. But these class 4 are really looking at having some sort of physical barrier separation in a bike lane, such as that you see on the lower right. There's some sort of curb that separates. They could be planting boxes. It could be parked cars. There's a number of different strategies. So that's something that we could evaluate as we look at projects as they move forward, if there's an opportunity to do that, even if it's not currently as part of the plan, but is also something that we would probably like to see amended to the plan to incorporate these sort of facilities, because these are starting to emerge and have emerged really as the best practice and the best means to provide safety. This is something that we're considering as part of the West Glendale Sustainable Transportation and Land Use Study that we hope to bring forward in the coming months to City Council. There are some design alternatives that do incorporate class 4 bicycle facilities. to really enhance that corridor for cyclist safety.
Mr. Calvert, go
Yes.
back to the previous page, please. Yes. Okay, tell me now. The picture on the right top corresponds with which class?
Class 1.
Okay. And the bottom picture,
That would be Class 2.
class 2?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
This is just a map that illustrates planned and implemented bicycle infrastructure. So you can see that a number of networks have been completed. Some are also in the works. Public Works is also going to be giving an update on some of those projects that have been completed as part of implementation. This is the map of the southern portion of the city, which also highlights that network, especially with Sharrows. You can see that Glen Oaks is also highlighted as a future or as an existing bicycle lane. But this is one of those opportunities where we do see moving beyond just what the plan recommends and looking at something like a Class 4 bicycle facility. With BRT coming, it's an excellent opportunity for us to enhance this and also to employ best practices. And the bicycle transportation plan has in our opinion, has worked effectively. In 2012, we did see a peak in the total number of incidents and collisions, and we have seen a steady decline since then. Granted, 2019 went up slightly compared to 2018, but was still below 2017, really below every year's level with the exception of 2018. So we do believe that the work that was put forth in that plan, the work that Public Works has put forth towards of implementation has done what it's intended to do, and that's improve the bicycle infrastructure and the environment as well as the safety for users. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to Edward Hitty from Public Works, and he is going to go over kind of the process for the improvements in implementation, as well as some of the projects that have been completed.
Thank you, Bradley. Good afternoon, councils and Mayor Agajanian and City Council members. This slide really will be talking about the process of improvement and implementation of the bike transportation plan. The Public Works looks for every opportunity to integrate, implement, as well as fund the bike transportation plan recommendation in every CIP project. The city has approximately 121 bikeway miles out of 377 of roadways. Part of the CIP project design, the Public Works review and verifies the different types of bicycle classes consist of 14 miles of Class 1 bike path, 31 miles of Class 2 bike lane, and 76 miles of Class 3 bike route. For the last 8 years, the Public Works constructed approximately 30 miles of combined bikeway classes as recommended by the bike transportation plan. And these projects include approximately 1,700 linear feet of Class 1 bike path, 2 miles of Class 2 bike lane, and 4,500 linear feet of Class 3 bike route. This will approximately come at a cost of $1.3 million of bicycle infrastructure cost. The geometric limitation also and the configuration such as the right-of-way, lane width, turning radius, or even street parking of each street are taken into consideration as part of the design in order to integrate and implement the bikeway infrastructure. In the next 5 slides, actually, you will have snapshot of a few examples of the CIP project where the bikeway infrastructure project have been integrated and completed. Next slide, thank you. On this particular project is the Central Avenue and adjacent street. This project integrated Class 2 bike lane by widening Central Avenue. And we have along the stretch of that project from the north end and to the south end, if we start from the south and moving up to the project limit on Central, we have different right-of-way width, also different space or distance between curbs. So for the segment, for example, segment of Central Avenue from Broadway to Wilson, we were able to accommodate Class 3 route. And that will be with the right-of-way roughly 96 feet, and we have the curb varied from 72 to 76. So we were able to widen the easterly side by changing the sidewalk width. Changing the right-of-way itself is very expensive, could be cost prohibitive sometimes due to the land acquisition and property demolition and the purchasing. We were able, though, to modify the sidewalk width from 14 down to 10 we have 10 feet on each side, and we'll be able to accommodate that segment of the Class 3 route, bike route. We have also another segment where we were able to reduce to 2 feet, from 11 feet reduced down to 9 feet. This is Lexington to Booth at the end of this project limit. And we were able at this point also to be able to put 9 feet sidewalk on each side and be able to accommodate the Class 2. In this particular project, really, we were able to accomplish the completion of construction of half a mile of Class 2 bike lane and integrate almost 1/10 of the mile of Class 3 bike route by having bicyclists share the rightmost travel lane with the motorist. Next slide, please. This project is the construction of bicycle facility. Again, looking at some funding here, Measure R, and Citywide Bikeway and Pedestrian Improvement Project. This project really integrated Class 2 colored bicycle lane within existing street right-of-way by decreasing travel lane width on Sonora between Glen Oaks and Garden from before this project was 15 feet down to 10 feet. And we're able to accomplish almost 0.85 miles of a Class 2 colored bike lane. We'll also be able to integrate a Class 3 bike route by having cyclists share the travel lane with motorists along Mountain between Thurber Place and Highway Avenue, Allen Avenue, between San Fernando Road to Mountain, and so forth all the way down to Kenneth Road to Valley Road and Central. And we have here travel lane really varies from as narrow as 10 feet up to 17 feet. Next slide, please.
Mr. Heedy, maybe can I ask you something? I mean, I don't know
Sure.
if you need the picture which you were showing. What's the difference when the bike lane is colored green and there are some bike lanes there is no color on it?
Sure. This is only for visibility. They are both designed the same way. The bike lane is still Class 2, either whether color or not color. This is one of the improvement in bring up the visibility of that lane and to be able to really define better the limit or the travel lane from the bicycle lane, as well as because back then, and still we don't have the buffer zone. When we don't have the buffer zone, typically like 2 to 3 feet between the bike lane and the travel lane, it's another concept, another idea came up to paint that lane.
Oh, so we're gonna
But
paint the
both are
balance
Class
of the rest of it also. We're gonna paint at a later time green wherever we have bike lane like this.
This
Are
is
we going-
honestly, I'm not sure if that was a pilot study was done or was only implemented for that particular. I can look back the history and get back to you on that.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next slide, please. I believe on the. Thank you. This is what we call it. Again, this is you have the Class 1 bike path. As you see, this has its own right of way. There's no interaction with any traffic. It's painted, improved as if it's a roadway, but this is only 12 feet wide, 6 feet in each direction. And this particular project, we're able to complete close to 1,700 of a Class 1 bike path as part of the Riverwalk Improvement Project. And this is only, you may see interaction with the traffic if it reach at one point at intersection and cross that road to continue, let's say, to the other side of the channel, or in case like this, if there's any like off-road bike trail. Next slide, please. This is the Highland Avenue Rehab Project where we're able to integrate Class 2 bicycle lane by modifying lane width also any configuration. The Highland between San Fernando and Burchett, we changed the width to 10 feet down to 15 feet, as well as however, this is again because there's some restriction, as mentioned earlier, how much we can modify lane or sidewalk. In this case, we're really stuck because we have minimum 10 feet travel lane. So the segment on Highland between Glenos and Glenwood remain the same. But we're also able to integrate Class 3 bicycle route by having bicycles share the travel lane with motorists. And this is where we have a travel lane with where it varies from 12 to 14 feet on Highland between Burchett and Pacific. We were able to accomplish here or achieve almost a half a mile of Class 3 bike route. Next slide, please. This slide really covered on two projects. The first one, the Kenneth Road Class 3 bicycle route, by having the bicyclist also share the travel lane with the motorist. And we have the, here it's pretty much really narrow street. You have the street width from curb to curb only 36 feet. Typical standard we have for local street 40 feet. And this is for the travel lane only 10 feet. That's why we're only able to accommodate the travel lane, a Class 3 bicycle route, and we're able to complete almost a little bit short than 1 mile, almost 0.9 miles. The Ocean View Boulevard Rehab Project, this is where we integrate Class 2 bicycle lane with the existing right-of-way by decreasing travel lane in this area, with the right-of-way width of 46 feet, and we're able to complete approximately 1/3 of a mile of Class 2 bike lane. And I will turn it over to Mr. Calvert. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
All right.
Yeah, I have,
Mr.
are we finished
Broughton.
with the bicycle plan? I've been kind of holding my questions till we're,
Mr. Broughton.
Yes, that's the last slide for the bicycle transportation plan.
okay. Mr. Mayor, may I ask some questions?
Yes, please, Mr. Councilmember Broughton.
Yeah, Bradley, you suggesting, at least I heard in what you said that there is no plan to update the bicycle transportation plan at this time. That's not a decision we've made. And I thought that we were going to look in our next budgeting cycle to carve out some money for that.
Yes, it's not that we don't have a plan. What we're stating there is that until we secure that funding, until we're able to move forward with that update, we would look at some of the projects during that implementation phase to see if there's opportunities for better practices or best practices until we are able to start updating that plan.
Okay, so just, for the record, I think, the plan, what is it now, 8 to 9 years old? Well, it was probably developed, it probably took some time to develop, so more like 9 years old. It might have been good at the time, but it's really, out of date, and it's not what a city like Glendale deserves. It's, we've got 60% of our infrastructure right now is sharrows, and I strongly feel that, sharrows on roads, on high speed roads, like right near where I live on Cañada, are not bicycle infrastructure. I mean, it's extremely dangerous riding down those roads, sharrow or no sharrow. And by the way, just yesterday, I don't know if you know, the person that we're going to appoint to the Transportation Commission, hopefully later today, Shanna Bonson, her brother was injured riding a bike down Verdugo, just north of the college. Another bike injury, unfortunately. I think sounds like he'll be okay, but he was knocked off his bike and with a hit and run situation. But anyway, that's I do think everybody knows Glendale is not a safe place to bike, and it's also not a safe place to walk. And I think we all recognize that, and the community wants better. And I think we really should be making an effort to bring that bike plan up to current standards. That's just a general statement. The other thing to what Mr. Hiddy was saying, it's disappointing to see that we're trading off pedestrian and bike infrastructure. We're narrowing sidewalks to create space for bike pathways. And I would really like us to look at our lane widths, because I know on some streets we have 12-foot lanes, which are really designed for driving 75 miles an hour. They're not the kinds of widths that we need, and I think it's generally recommended for walkable cities to have lanes that are no more than 10 feet wide. So I would hope that going forward, we look at taking some of the width off of the travel lanes, which has the added benefit of naturally slowing down traffic, to be able to provide the geometry that we need for bike lanes. So I just want to say that.
Thank you. Mr. Golania.
Yes, thank you, Mayor
PE.
Agajanian, Member City Council. I just wanted to make an additional comment, what Mr. Calvert had noted. I had previously mentioned that we currently, in this fiscal year, do not have funding appropriated for the update of the bicycle master plan, but we will include it as a line item when the budget is presented to council for consideration, and if deemed appropriate, then allocation of those funds in the next fiscal year, that we can hopefully conduct a new update to the master plan.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Calvert?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Ksaka.
I also have reserved some of my comments, at least for this section,
Mr.
till
Councilmember
the
Ksaka.
presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to just make the comment that, I hear staff and I understand where staff is coming from. However, as has been mentioned, time has passed since that first plan. We need to revise that plan. And quite honestly, we can't say that much of what we've done or our efforts have resulted in a more safer environment for bicyclists. And I do think that I don't want to seem Pollyannish and think that we're going to live in a culture like Denmark where we're going to have more bikes than cars. I think we'll maybe a ways away from that, but we certainly can make the bicyclists that we do have now much safer. I do believe in the more stringent, curb separated bike lanes like they have in places like Montreal and elsewhere that are closer to the curb and put the parked cars out towards where the traffic is. So, only a passenger side door opening may be the greatest threat to a bicyclist. And I do want to reiterate the fact that and if that means the elimination of lanes in certain places, it's definitely worth to try it and see how it works. Because I do think if people feel safe and secure, there's that added protection that there will be more people able to ride. I do believe that it's a lot more difficult to ride a bike from the south portion of the city to the northern portion, from say South Glendale to Montrose, but certainly in the flatlands in the downtown area and the residential areas, it's prime flat areas for bicycling as a mode of commuting, and hopefully we'll expand on that with an official shared bike program when we introduce it. One other thing I do want to reiterate, that perhaps now's the time to do so, that we are one of the few cities that still regulates or criminalizes riding bikes on the sidewalk, and sidewalks are oftentimes the places where bicyclists who are just starting out may feel the safest. I know when I was young, growing up in Glendale, I've ridden my BMX bike on our sidewalks, and it was a primary place where I learned how to ride a bike versus the streets. I think that, whatever regulations we have or whatever laws we may have that criminalize that now, we need to revise those and allow for bicycle riding on sidewalks. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
And one other thing I do want to add,
Yes,
what I dream of is I would love to see a Chandler bike path type path in Glendale. I don't know where it would go. I don't know if Glen Oaks is necessarily the place where it can go, especially with the BRT. But we have to think of, how can we add that amenity to the city rather than just simple sharrows. Sharrows seem to be like a target marker for some drivers, unfortunately. It does not do an adequate job. We can paint the lane green, we can paint it red, we can paint it bright pink. It will still not provide the safety and the security that bicyclists need. We are still taking a major risk riding a bicycle on our roads today, and we have to make sure that stops.
Thank you.
The risk factor, not the bike riding, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, Ms. Devine, Councilmember Devine.
Yeah. Yes, you know, I'm all for updating this bicycle plan, pedestrian plans. So I look forward to that coming in the next budget. However, you know, we can do everything we can, all the plans to make it safer for bicyclists, for cyclists, but they're going to be useless unless the cyclists obey the rules. And so I don't know how we overcome that. I guess it's with more education, but something has to be put in a plan somewhere that they have to be educated as to stopping at stop signs and at red lights and heating. You know, it's not all about engineering and planning. It's also about education and safe cycling. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Devine. Okay, Mr. Calvert.
Yeah, so the next topic here, and we'll keep this relatively brief on slow streets because we are coming back later on this evening for this. This is a council-directed program. This was partially in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, recognizing that there were more cyclists, more pedestrians using the right-of-way, especially when they were trying to maintain safe social distancing, but also just getting out of their house more often. The goal here was really to increase the awareness of those alternative modes of transportation using the right-of-way. We had established a city website for applications to be submitted to have these signs installed. Overall, we created the sign and offered a feedback email address so that residents could let us know if they were running into any issues with them or if they were just working. We wanted to hear whether or not this was something that was working as an effective means to help slow down traffic. Overall, we received 96 applications, 85 of which were approved. We used a criteria to establish where they could go, and that was essentially ruling out major thoroughfares. Central Avenue in downtown, Glen Oaks Boulevard, recognizing those were not probably appropriate locations to place these signs. The signs were placed on A-frames with preference going to placing them in the center of the street. This is an example of one that was installed. This was actually a great place to put it. As you can see, this street is absent of sidewalks, and while we were out there taking photographs, we could see people that were out there using it. So the preference was to put that at the stop line in the middle of the intersection to really slow down cars, especially when they were making turns. That was the important part here. So when making that turn, it did require more of a 90-degree angle in slowing down those automobiles. A total of 300 signs were distributed citywide. Over 191 different street segments. And what we mean by that is that some segments span several blocks, so they needed more than just signs at the opposing ends of that street. Some went mid-block, some had T intersections or additional intersections in them. So some locations required more than just 2 signs, depending on the street. 250 of these were placed in North Glendale, with 50 of them in South Glendale. When we consider later on this evening the potential for a permanent program, this is something that we really want to try to address. We heard feedback from TPC on how they would like to see the program move forward, which we'll also present to council, but doing more to reach the southern portions of Glendale, recognizing that we need to do better outreach in order to hear back from them. Some of the early applications were driven much by South Glendale, but as the program moved on, most of those started to tilt towards North Glendale. So we really want to focus on trying to do a more equitable distribution if we do move forward with a permanent program. Again, we plan on presenting that this evening because not everything about this program has worked well. We have had overwhelming support from the residents for this through that email box, but we have also seen some bad actors. Whether those signs have been vandalized, run into by automobiles, we have also had damage from some of the windstorms that we've seen. So what we would like to do is put forward alternatives to move the program potentially into a permanent phase, which would require affixing these to the street in a more secure fashion, which would make them a little more resilient from damage, vandalism, or being stolen. You can see an example there on the left of one of the signs that had been demolished and the sandbag had been cut open. But tonight we'll give more of an update. Public Works will also assist with that and how that implementation went about and what those different alternatives look like for a permanent program. So now what I'd like to do is turn this over to Public Works so they can give an update on the citywide traffic study.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bradley. And this slide really will explain the background of why citywide traffic study is needed. The regional transit project address long-range congestion issues and offer other modes of travel. However, a more near-term assessment is needed to evaluate and manage present-day transportation operational issues. Future regional transit system improves such as the streetcar project and bus rapid transit address long-range congestion issues in the city of Glendale and will offer alternate forms of mobility to the public. However, there's a need to assess near-term future measures that address current traffic and transportation operational issues. The proposed citywide traffic study addresses current and near-term future traffic and transportation operations and will provide the data and tools to help make data-driven decisions on managing current issues. If you go to the next slide, please. Here we really touch on the objective of the citywide traffic study, which are to provide detailed system-wide transportation analysis of the current and near future system to provide the quantitative data required to understand and evaluate system needs, benefits and impacts of transportation projects, as well as balance the needs of multiple modes of travel within the system. This slide really will provide an overview of the objective of citywide traffic study. The study will provide a detailed analysis of the existing transportation system and will focus on the immediate and near-term health of the traffic circulation within the city. The study will provide a quantitative view of current transportation issues, impacts, concerns, trends, system capacity surplus, and shortfalls. The data generated by the study really will provide the baseline condition to assist leadership and staff to make informed and data-driven decisions about proposed transportation projects, ensure the efficiency and effective use of budgetary resources, and balance the need of multiple modes of travel. Next slide, please. And here we're in touch of the, earlier mentioned the baseline task. And this slide here will provide an overview of the baseline tasks that will be involved in the study. The study will include a traffic volume monitoring program and will develop a computer model for use in assessing the impacts of transportation projects and provide potential alternatives and solutions to alleviate current and near-term traffic congestion. The study will use also the citywide computer model to analyze intersection, street segment traffic, operation, and provide the required data to identify and resolve traffic congestion issues. Recent traffic volume data will compare to previous year's data to address traffic flow pattern changes resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. Lastly, the study will review emergency vehicle traffic flow and outline opportunities for improving response time with the use of current emergency vehicle presumption technology. And I'll conclude that segment of this presentation. If you have any questions, I'm available to answer.
Is there any question from Ms. Heaty? Mr. Heaty, is there anybody has a question from Mr. Heaty?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Bott.
Hi, Edward. So in this study, when you're looking at, you talk about solutions to address congestion. When you look at those solutions, are you going to be screening them through the lens of how they impact safety, what we were just talking about earlier, and vehicle miles traveled? I want to make sure that we do that, because there are always going to be solutions that, or not always, I should say, there will sometimes be solutions that involve trade-offs, and we need to be able to make those judgments very explicitly.
We look at all those factors, and that's why we do the study for everything before we make any changes. Sometimes the study may lead to do some pilot analysis, pilot study, test it before we implement it. Those approach we look into, sure, we look at the traffic history, we look at the impact when we make modification to this segment, what will be the impact on the neighboring streets, or what will be impact on the circulation elements. As well as, we put all those data generated and a lot of engineering assumption based on the guidelines that mentioned earlier by Caltrans, Ms. Carpenter about the MUTCD. Those are guidelines manual that we use to maintain consistency with the city and be able to justify those changes.
So we explicitly evaluate potential impacts on safety and vehicle miles traveled.
The MVP, this is on LOS. Will be part of the study. And as you know, Councilmember Rotman, some will require whether it trigger environmental or not environmental study. We have both tools that can be used to implement certain projects.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're not only using LOS for anything, that we should be moving away from LOS, right? And we should be using, I mean, I'm not saying don't look at LOS. I think it's important information because sometimes we might make a decision where we're getting such benefit to reducing congestion and perhaps the costs in terms of, you know, the other things we care about are minuscule, and then that makes sense. So I'm not saying don't look at LOS, but I want to make sure that we are always in everything we're looking at. We've got a VMT measure, and we're looking at this key issue that the community has said they care so much about, which is pedestrian and bicycle safety.
That's true.
Thank you. I have to, before I go to other colleagues of mine, we have a caller, I guess. I don't know if still the caller is in there because it's, he or she is waiting for such a long time. So let's go to the call.
Yes, Mayor, I have one caller. Alec Barstrosov. Alec? Alec, can you hear me?
Oh,
Alec?
he waited for such a long time, he got tired from.
Alec? Alec Bartrosov?
So, Alec, please call back. So, we will continue, but we still have time. He can call back. Okay. What's next now? Oh, was there any other question from my colleagues? Okay. What's next?
We have just a couple more items to touch on as part of this mobility study session, just some of the things that are coming up as well. One quick update. You heard about this last summer. We gave an update on the SB 743 compliance. We've heard it mentioned here several times this afternoon about that transition from level of service measurement to vehicle miles traveled. We presented that update back in the summer. The goal here is to really try to more fairly evaluate how we do travel as individuals and offering mitigation measures that include all modes of transportation, not just roadway and intersection improvements. We have, as we presented last summer, have completed that work in terms of identifying thresholds. We are finalizing mitigation strategies, and we will be ready to use this for any potential upcoming and future projects. There will also be a development tool that will be included as part of this, so that those that are proposing projects will have an ability to understand exactly their VMT impact. As you heard, it does not mean that we completely lose level of service analysis. That is still something that we reserve the right to use at a local level, particularly when it relates to intersections or curb cuts, things of that nature. So that information will still come forward as part of projects as well. We are also working on the update of the circulation element. The goal here is to really incorporate many of the things that we are talking about here today. The improvements for bicycle transportation infrastructure, pedestrian improvements, the streetcar study, BRT. This is working closely with our land use and housing element update. It'll also help inform that traffic impact fee that we plan to bring forward to council next year. This will include periodic updates to council. We want to make sure that you stay up to date and in the loop, as well as the Transportation and Parking Commission throughout this year and next year. Right now, we are just in the data collection phase and working with some of those outcomes that will come from the land use and housing element update that will help inform the circulation element update. Just a quick update on the Verdugo Wash. As you're aware, this is part of the bicycle transportation plan. The goal here is to also include pedestrian improvements, but to also pursue opportunities for open space above or adjacent or within the wash. This will also look at habitat restoration as well. In terms of the timeline for this, with this serving as kind of a multimodal transportation infrastructure and open space, this touches a number of neighborhoods in the city. I believe up to 15, if I'm not mistaken. And the goal here is to create a unique and memorable experience. So we will have extensive outreach. This is something that we do anticipate to launch here in the coming weeks, or coming months, excuse me. We hope to do field visits and virtual interviews as well, and public engagement events to help kick this design process off. As you're aware, back in October, we awarded the contract to the firm Milk and their subconsultant team, Burrow Happold, a local engineering firm, to help us realize the vision. The image that you see in the background, I think, is an important one that kind of embodies the goals and the objectives of this project. You can see in this, it was a restoration of an old parking lot and storm drainage lot. And they were able to restore the natural habitat to perform its duties as a flood control measure, but also to incorporate recreational and multimodal transportation opportunities. Coming forward to Council on March 9th will be shared mobility. Council had instructed staff and directed staff to issue an RFP pursuing up to at least 2 vendors to provide shared mobility devices for the city of Glendale. This was to be split between bicycles and scooters, potentially. The potential vendors were all asked to submit separate proposals for bicycles and scooters. And this is really to start what we would consider a 12-month pilot program to evaluate whether or not shared mobility is something that would work in the city of Glendale, if it's something that could fit into our transportation infrastructure and is used with the intents that we hope it would be used for. And that's that kind of first and last mile connectivity. So that is something that we will be bringing back to council in the coming weeks. There are a number of kind of preliminary regulations that were kind of defined, including operating hours, public engagement and safety education for the program, means to collect data, the service area as illustrated here on the right, geofencing to ensure proper behavior and parking of devices and making sure that the use of the devices stays within the service area. Those regulations that were put forth were not intended to be the final ones. They were to serve as a framework as we work with the selected vendors based on the outcome of next or March 9th council date. From there, we would actually come back with, we'll have the recommended vendors on March 9th, and following that selection of vendors, we would come back with the refined regulations based on the feedback from the vendors, based on any additional feedback we hear from council on March 9th. And there will also be some discussion of changing certain ordinances to ensure writing. But again, that regulatory framework that we kind of defined and the outside of this consideration for this initiative really set to start a conversation. Anything from the location, I know that council has mentioned on a few occasions to consider roping in Glendale Community College as part of that. Those are all things that we can take up as part of additional conversations.
Thank you.
So that concludes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead. I'm sorry to stop you.
I was just going to say that concludes the presentation. Again, the idea here was to give an overview on a number of initiatives you're going to be seeing in the coming weeks and months. If you have any additional questions, I'll be more than happy to answer those.
Mr. Calvert, I know we discussed this before on the previous page, which we say 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. operating hours. That's for those who rent a bicycle or motorcycle in the center of the city. What was that time frame for?
Correct. The operating hours that we had originally proposed would be from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. that bicycles and scooters could be rented during that time.
And
the premise behind, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But then what happens? I rented at 9 p.m., but I'm not able to come back at 11 p.m. for any reason. What will happen?
The devices would be locked so that they cannot be used. In fact, the vendors would come out and collect the devices in case any maintenance needed to be done, and then redistribute so that they are kind of evenly distributed around the city. There needs to be kind of a recalibration process at the end of each day to make sure that they are placed in locations where they're needed.
So the renter should be very careful then, right? That would be hard.
Yes,
They may
and there will-
forget. They may forget, or the watch they have doesn't work properly. I don't know if they look at their telephone these days. They will know what time it is, but I don't know if they will be able to pinpoint that they come back at 11 p.m. and drop it exactly at that second. I think that will be a problem, but okay. Thank you. Now we have callers or caller. Okay, let's go to the caller, please.
Alec Brasasov. Alec, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so this is Alec Bartrosov. I served on the advisory committee for the pedestrian plan back when I was a transportation commissioner. And I want to applaud the work that was put into this pedestrian plan, which is now 5 or 6 years in the making. And as I'm hearing the presentation today, the thing that kind of concerns me is this whole idea of having to do an analysis for every single project that's coming forward. So in the pedestrian plan, the number one thing that's identified by the community, by the advisory committee, is that speeding is the number one concern for people who want to walk. And so when we talk about these analyses to do curb extensions, raised crosswalks, chokers, all of these things that have meaningful impact that are studied and show that they will reduce collisions are all subject to these kind of traffic analyses. And I feel like if we are doing what we want to do with the pedestrian plan, all this is going to do is poke holes through the effectiveness of the plan itself. So I'm very concerned about that. The other thing that I wanted to point out is one-way streets, as staff has mentioned, is very dangerous for users of the road. It almost certainly encourages people to speed faster than in a two-way street. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is I want to make sure that council is not confused by the effectiveness of educational campaigns. I think they're cute, and I think having stickers on the sidewalk and banners on the street are nice to look at, but they are not in any way a measurable success of traffic safety. So I think if we are going to allocate precious dollars, we should be focusing on infrastructure changes and not, in many ways, blaming the victim, focusing these efforts on bicyclists or pedestrians that are the most vulnerable users of the road. I would advocate that we focus those funds on actual infrastructure changes that will make a meaningful difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there any other caller?
Mayor, there is none.
Okay, thank you. All right, now, what's next?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Brotman.
Yeah, so just I just want to get back to the shared mobility plan. So just to clarify, because Mr. Mayor, you said something about motorcycles. There are no motorcycles in this, but there will be e-bikes. Is that correct?
That is correct. E-bikes would be part of that.
Okay. And e-bikes, I mean, they're great because Councilmember Kasakian talked before about how it's hard to get from the flats up to the let's say to the college or well, we're not going to go into Montrose with this program, but let's say we go to the college, those e-bikes would make it very nice and easy to get up to the college. Apart from the fact that it's dangerous to ride on some of the roads getting up there, we'll have to address that. But certainly, I think e-bikes are a good addition. So, and I also agree with what Councilmember Kasakian said about sidewalk riding. I think we should look at that. And I would hope that when you come back with potential ordinances, we include that. At the very least, we should allow sidewalk riding in areas where we don't have safe bicycle infrastructure. If we have a good protected bike path, like I guess a class 2, then, you know, there's no reason for a bicyclist to be on the sidewalk. But where we don't have those, if it's a fast moving street with sharrows, I mean, if we don't let people go on the sidewalk, we're asking for trouble. And it could impact the success of the program if people don't feel safe using those bikes. So I would definitely, he didn't make it as a motion, but I would second that's something that I would like us to look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question or questions from council
I
members?
just, Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I know we'll save
Mr.
that for
Najai.
another day. But part of the danger is putting bicyclists with pedestrians, and bicyclists can be some of the most cruel operators that I've seen. They just go zipping through skateboards and all that other stuff, scooters. So we have to, I think about this carefully as to what the consequences would be of permitting bicycles on our sidewalks. And we'll probably have a discussion if it comes forward.
Yeah, Councilmember Najarian and Mayor and
Mr.
Councilmember Brotman and all my colleagues, I believe most cities have a more relaxed set of rules in regards to sidewalk riding, which is the reason I have suggested it for us to look into as well. I understand the concerns, and obviously they're ones that I have, especially with people with more and more different devices becoming automated, or you have these faster skateboards that have motors in them and others, and the face of mobility is changing rapidly. But ultimately we also have young people who are learning how to ride bicycles. If they're riding on a sidewalk, if they're riding with a parent who's there observing them, pushing them onto the street is I think more dangerous than allowing them to ride it on the sidewalk. And I'd like our police and our engineers in traffic or in transportation and folks in planning to come back with proposals as to how we can model our policies after some of the other cities for consistency's sake too. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now, I guess, what is next, Mr. Ajemian?
Mayor, that was the last item.
That's the last item. May I have a
Move to
motion?
adjourn.
If there's no other questions or comments, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. With that said, the meeting is adjourned at 4:06 p.m. Thank you.